In part one here, we're really looking at Alvin Plantinga's criticism of classical or foundational evidentialism. And then in part two, we'll go on and explore what he has to say about properly basic beliefs about God. But we really need to set that up here with part one when we have a more broader discussion of epistemology and what Alvin Plantinga has to say about evidentialism. So the question is belief in God without arguments rational? Is that possible to have a rational belief that God exists and yet not have an argument to support that? Well, if we're going to explore this question, we need to ask whether or not the belief conforms to the standards of rationality. Well, if we're going to ask about whether it conforms to the standards of rationality, another question that obviously would come up is, what are the standards for rationality? So that is a really tough question. Obviously, we're not going to be able to resolve all of that in this video. But for one thing, let's note a couple aspects of this. Let's note that being rational in holding a belief does not imply that it's true. You can be rational in holding a belief and yet have a false belief. In other words, rationality doesn't mean that you are infallible about what you believe. Of course not. It could not possibly imply that. We don't hold infallibility as the standard for everyone in order to be rational, because no one is infallible. So you could be rational, for example, if you do a sum several times, if you do a multiplication and you come up with an answer and then you do it again a little, with using a different method and you come up with the same answer, but you're mistaken, right? You temporarily had a lapse and you thought 8 times 7 was 64 instead of 56 or something like that. Or Isaac Newton had really good reasons to believe that he was correct about Newtonian physics. Of course, we know since Einstein, that is not the case in all circumstances. Or if you go back to ancient history of 1948, when people in Chicago believed that Dewey defeated Truman for the presidency because that's what the Chicago Daily Tribune printed, or still ancient history for most of you that if you go back to the year 2000 and you were watching CBS on the election night, you would have heard that Al Gore won the election when, of course, that was not the case. So you could be rational in believing something and it still not be true. So just that qualification, we want to make sure that we're clear on that. So now moving on to evidentialism. Some might argue that there is not enough evidence to justify one in believing that God exists. Many people, in fact, do argue this. Evidentialism is the claim, and here we're making it particular to beliefs about God. So evidentialism is the claim that belief in God can only be justified with sufficient evidence. Now, this is often taken to be assumption among philosophers and other people. It's very broadly accepted. So that is kind of a standard, generic, common belief. Now, when we're talking about evidence here, not enough evidence, typically in philosophical argumentation, of course, our evidence is argument. So evidence includes beliefs, arguments that gives reason to believe something else. So that's what we're talking about primarily. We're not talking about going out and gathering empirical evidence here. We're talking about reasoning things through. Now, what would be, since this seems to be true, it seems to be obvious for many people, what would be the contrast to this? Well, non-evidentialism is the idea that it is possible for religious beliefs, and of course this could apply to other beliefs too, but that's what we're interested in here. It's possible for religious beliefs to be justified even if there isn't any evidence or arguments supporting those beliefs, that you still might have justified or rational beliefs even without sufficient evidence. Now, just to clarify, this is not fideism. Fideism is using the Latin term fide for faith. It's not faithism. It's not saying that religious beliefs are just beyond rationality. No one should rationally evaluate them. That's not the case at all. The non-evidentialists like Plantinga and Bergman and others will still say that religious beliefs are subject to rational evaluation. So the basic challenge, though, of evidentialism, and here now we're going to be even more specific about religion, we're going to start talking about Christianity. The basic challenge of evidentialism is that it's wrong to accept Christianity or, obviously any other religious belief without good evidence or without good arguments. That's the challenge. And so the idea is that having enough evidence needs to be consistent with a proper noetic structure. So just a moment or two, actually a minute or two here, let's talk about a proper noetic structure. When we're talking about a noetic structure, we're talking about a collection of beliefs that one has, and then how those beliefs are related to one another in various ways. So let's consider several beliefs. You believe that you exist. You believe that other people exist. You believe that 3 + 2 = 5, if I may be presumptuous about what you believe. But there are also other beliefs. You believe I am a fill in the blank with whatever you are, right? I am a professor. I am a male, something like that. Or Arizona has a warm climate. Now, most of these things that I've mentioned, of course, filling in the proper blank for you, are things that you're pretty confident about. So a noetic structure has to do with degree of beliefs for one aspect. How strongly do you believe it? Well, belief that other people exist, that's held really strongly for most people, right? It's also related to other beliefs. So 3 + 2 = 5, or if we did 3 × 2 = 6, well, that's going to be related to other beliefs. Like if you did 13 × 12, and you didn't have a calculator, you're going to use that belief that 3 × 2 = 6 in order to calculate what 12 × 13 is, for example. And so it's going to be connected to other beliefs. It's going to have implications toward what other beliefs there might be. So here are just a broad collection of other beliefs. These are beliefs that I have, presumably beliefs that you might share, right? Common, simple chemical beliefs like water is H2O, historical beliefs like Lincoln lived in Illinois, at least for part of his life. Astronomy beliefs, the moon is not made of green cheese, right? A philosopher named Socrates lived in Athens a long time ago. Many adverbs, I say, end in ly, but the word friendly is not an adverb. The earth is more than 1,000 years old. There are more than 1 million people on Earth. Just a few more here. Alexander Hamilton was shot in a duel. Frankfurt's the capital of Kentucky. Now, some of these you may not believe. Argentina is east of Illinois. In fact, it is. Iowa became a state before Wisconsin by about 2 years. Iowa in 1846 and Wisconsin in 1848. I probably wouldn't have remembered Wisconsin had I not looked it up recently. But in any case, right, all of these beliefs, we hold them to various degrees. Some of them are really central also to what you believe. So they are deeply ingressed, we might say. So it might not be that hard to change a belief. If you believe that Wisconsin became a state before Iowa, that's really not going to affect many others of your beliefs. It certainly wouldn't affect any of the other beliefs on this screen. And so some of them, not a big deal. But some of them, like 3 + 2 = 5, or I exist, right? If you were to change those beliefs, they would have drastic ramifications for other beliefs that you have. So the more ramifications for other beliefs, the more deeply ingressed a belief is. So quickly, to summarize what we're talking about with the noetic structure, we have degrees of belief, how strongly you hold beliefs. There are relationships between beliefs. Some beliefs imply others. So you probably believe that there are more than 1 billion people on Earth, and that implies that there are more than 1 million people on Earth. And then there is a level of ingression of beliefs. Some of them are on the periphery, you might say, don't really affect many other beliefs. Some of them are very central to your beliefs, like the Earth existed more than 10 minutes ago and other minds exist. So that's just a background talking about noetic structure. All right, let's go back to this question. What evidence is required in order for one to be rational? Well, in a well-formed noetic structure, where the beliefs are fitting together well, right? Some beliefs are going to be based on others. We already mentioned a couple examples. Do we have to have evidence that is an argument, a good argument, for every belief? Right? Is that what it takes for rationality? Now, the answer there is clearly no, right? Such a standard would lead to either a circle, your beliefs would have to be circling back on one another, or an infinite regress. And obviously, circular reasoning is bad, so that's not going to help you with rationality. Having an infinite number of beliefs is not possible for us humans. I mean, who has time for that, right? So we can't require that. So some beliefs have to be basic, that is, they are accepted without evidence, that is, without argumentation. And then, of course, some people are rational, right? And so some of those basic beliefs, the ones that aren't based on evidence, have to be properly basic, that is, accepted without evidence, and one is within one's intellectual rights to accept that belief. You're not violating any principle of rationality. So that gets us to the existence of some properly basic beliefs. Okay, we'll talk about that in part 2, but here in part 1, we still need to talk about what classical foundationalism is and why Plantinga rejects it. Okay, so classical foundationalism is the idea that in order for one to be rational in having a belief, the belief must be either self-evident, that is, when you look at it, you just see that it's obviously true, it's accepted by any rational person, or it's incorrigible, it's something that you just can't doubt. You just can't doubt that other minds exist, for example, or it's based on evidence, that is, it might be derived from self-evident beliefs or incorrigible beliefs through logical inference. Now, some of the ancient foundationalists might, or the medieval foundationalists for that matter, might have included evidence here for sensory evidence, being able to see or hear something. Modern philosophers probably would not have included that. Okay, now here's the first problem with classical foundationalism. The main thesis of classical foundationalism, that which we've just described, it isn't based on evidence. We haven't seen an argument for it. There have been no convincing arguments that this is true. And it doesn't meet its own criteria for proper basicality, right? This claim that in order for one to be rational, the belief must be A, B, or C, that's not self-evident, right? And it's not incorrigible. It's not impossible to doubt. And it's not based on the evidence, right? So that is a significant problem, and classical or strong foundationalism fails, argues Plantinga. It's self-referentially incoherent, right? If it's true, then it wouldn't be rational to believe it. It doesn't provide necessary criteria for rationality also, right? So that is a problem with classical foundationalism. One more problem, one more reason to think that it fails is that classical foundationalism implies that we are wrong about most of what we think we know. Most of our beliefs that we believe to be true, we don't actually know them. So if you believe you had pizza last night, or that your mother loves you, or that you just heard a car driving by, or nearly all of your common beliefs that you have, well, those don't meet the criteria for rationality according to strong foundationalism, and that's enough of a problem there also to think that foundationalism, the classical foundationalism, is mistaken. It is wrong. Now, in part two, we'll go on to consider how this relates to belief in God.